Extra Edition, No, Shar. Causality and Rebirth, a unified framework based on information conservation and non-local continuity. Scientific Discussion Edition. Abstract. This paper proposes a unified framework based on two core principles: information conservation and non-local continuity, to explain the physical basis of causality and rebirth. The framework is grounded in the ontological premise that the observer, the awareness or capacity to know, is, by nature, unborn and undying. Causality is understood as the structural transformation of information under conservation. Rebirth is understood as the recondensation of informational patterns after the dissolution of their material carrier. This framework avoids the metaphysical burden of a sole entity and remains compatible with quantum information theory, the non-locality principles of general relativity, and the fundamental assumptions of integrated information theory. IIT. Ontological premise. The unborn and undying observer as the basis of information conservation. Any physical theory must presuppose an observer, a system capable of recording, processing, and storing information. In quantum mechanics, the observer collapses the wave function. In relativity, the observer's spacetime coordinates define the order of events. This framework proposes the essence of the observer is a capacity to know, to feel, to manifest an awareness that is itself unborn and undying, independent of any material carrier. Neuroscience cannot explain how subjective experience, qualia, emerges from matter. Neuronal firings in the brain can be observed, but the observation of those firings is itself not a neuronal firing. This capacity to observe consciousness and the material system being observed are ontologically distinct levels of existence. Information must be stored on a carrier. The brain is a carrier of information, but the brain dies and decomposes. If consciousness were merely a product of the brain, then all information would dissipate upon brain death, meaning no information could survive death. Yet quantum information theory states, information is never destroyed, only transformed, the quantum no-cloning theorem and information conservation. If consciousness itself is the ultimate carrier of information and unborn and undying awareness, then information conservation follows naturally. As a child, you knew this is my mother. As an adult, you still know this is my mother. That knowing has never changed. It was never born, so it can never die. This knowing is your awareness. It is an eternally existing information carrier. Every thought, every action, every choice you make, all of it is information. This information is recorded within your awareness. Because your awareness never ceases, this information never disappears. Therefore, the reason causality is inexorable has a physical basis. The ultimate carrier of information, awareness, is unborn and undying. So information, the cause, never vanishes, it only transforms into another form, the effect. Q. An information conservation model of causality. Definition: causality等于 the structural transformation of information under conservation. Consider a closed system S, with total internal information I, S. By the law of information conservation, d, S, dt equals 0. The total information within the system does not change over time. However, the structure of that information does change. Let the information structure be M, Te 不等于 M, Tr. A cause is an information injection delta I that alters the system's information structure M. M 或 M1 加 delta M 等于 M2. The corresponding effect is the change in behavior or state produced by the system under its new information structure M2. P. Delta I does not disappear. It has been integrated into the system's total information I, S. It remains present until altered by other structural changes, and even when overlaid, its influence, structural modification, persists. This explains why causality does not vanish because information is conserved, Why causality can be delayed because structural changes may require specific conditions to manifest. Why causality is nonlinear because structural changes affect all future information processing. In quantum field theory, the S-matrix describes the transition between initial and final states. The information conservation model of causality can be seen as a generalization of the S-matrix taking information, rather than particles, as the fundamental unit. 3. An information continuity model of rebirth. Definition: Rebirth 等于 the recondensation of informational patterns after the dissolution of their material carrier. Let material carrier be, e.g., a body, where an informational pattern P, habits, tendencies, karmic seeds. When B dissolves, death, P does not disappear because information is conserved. P persists as an information field existing in non-local space. When a new material carrier B emerges, e.g., a new body, with sufficient complexity to bear P, P recondenses onto B. Mathematical formulation: let the state of informational pattern P at time t be P, T. When material carrier B dissolves, P, T 下划线 def, 不等于0, and P, T 下划线 def, exists as a non-local field. When new carrier B forms, P, T 下划线 birth, 约等于 P, T 下划线 def, 加 delta P, where delta P represents minor modifications introduced by B's initial conditions, genetics, environment. Key: non-local continuity. The continuity of P does not require a sole entity as a carrier. It follows the principle of quantum non-locality. Information can transcend space without physical transmission. General relativity's wormholes and quantum mechanics entanglement both demonstrate that non-locality is a fundamental feature of physical reality. The non-local continuity of informational patterns does not violate physics. It is a fact physics already acknowledges. This explains why rebirth does not require a soul because the informational pattern itself is the unit of continuity. Why the self in rebirth is neither identical nor entirely unrelated because P, T 下划线 birth, 约等于 P, T 下划线 def, 加 delta P, continuity with transformation. Why karma follows a being because P is that being's informational pattern. Quantum non-locality and entanglement can be seen as micro-level manifestations of the rebirth mechanism. The non-local continuity of informational patterns may relate to the topological structure of the quantum vacuum. SOR, a structural memory model of karma. Definition: karma 等于 the structural memory of informational patterns. Let informational pattern P possess an internal structure S. Each new information injection delta I alters S 比 S 左圆括号 T 加1右圆括号等于 S T 加 F delta I S T, where F is a nonlinear function describing how new information interacts with the existing information structure. Karma K is the sum total of the structural memory of informational pattern P. K 等于 F S T dt, where F maps information structure to tendency or potential. P, structural memory 等于 tendency. The structure S of an informational pattern determines the system's tendency to respond to future inputs. An angry information structure makes the system more likely to respond with anger. A compassionate structure makes it more likely to respond with compassion. This is not determinism, it is tendency. It influences probability distributions but does not fully determine outcomes. This explains why karma influences personality, tendencies, and response patterns because information structure determines how new information is processed. Why karma can be transformed because information structure can be altered by new information injection, practice, repentance, awakening. Why karma is not punishment, it is merely the system's structural tendency, not an external judgment. In complex systems theory, sensitive dependence on initial conditions describes how tiny differences lead to vastly different evolutionary paths. The structural memory model of karma can be seen as an extension of this principle to the information layer. The structure of informational patterns determines the system's evolutionary direction. V, an information simplification model of liberation. Definition: liberation 等于 the extreme simplification of informational pattern structure. When the structure S of informational pattern P simplifies below a critical threshold, it no longer requires condensation onto any material carrier. When the complexity C, S, of S falls below critical threshold C 下划线 critical, C, S, C 下划线 critical, no further material carrier required. At this point, informational pattern P returns to its pure information state awareness itself, no longer bound by any structural information, karma. P. Awakening 等于 simplification of information structure. Awakening recognizing oneself as the unborn and undying awareness is itself the process of informational simplification. When you cease generating new attachments, new information structures, existing structures gradually unbind, eventually reaching a state that no longer requires a carrier. This explains why liberation is possible because information structures can be simplified, why liberation requires practice because simplification takes time and effort, why there is no rebirth after liberation because the informational pattern no longer requires a material carrier. In non-equilibrium thermodynamics, systems can achieve more ordered states through entropy reduction. The information simplification model of liberation can be seen as the extreme expression of entropy reduction at the information level, simplifying information structure to its minimum, freeing the system from external carriers. Lia's integrated responses to 4 scientific challenges. Causality, determinism versus free will. Classical physics appears deterministic. Quantum mechanics appears random. The two cannot be reconciled. Response.